Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Rune Marked with myself and pdmac. We are picking up with chapter 9 and 10, and you know the deal, so we'll just jump into it. Chapter 9. You're not an elf? Gwen asked. She stopped walking and stared at Lyra suspiciously. What do you mean? Keep quiet, Lyra snapped, glancing around to see if anyone had taken an interest in their conversation. The few elves nearby were going about their business, and Lyra turned her eyes back on Gwen. It's not important. I think it is, Gwen replied, especially if you want me to trust you. There are many things in this life that you will never be privy to. If I trust you, then I will reveal what I mean in time. Now come along. Gwen felt the power of Lyra's authority like she had in the trial and followed her. She'd never been one to argue, and this day proved no different. They wound along the worn path that twisted through the forest city, past the temple they had met at the night before, and stopped at the natural entrance of what Gwen assumed was a garden. Virion tends this place, Lyra said. He is a wise mage, and many elves come from afar to seek his advice. Will he grant me a rune? Gwen asked. That is yet to be seen. If he thinks you are fit for one, he will grant it. Kirith said we would not be denied anything. Does he not rule over Virion? You like to play with childish talk, Lyra said. Do you not feel as dumb as you sound? Surely you hear your own words. Gwen's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but before she could recover her wits and offer a retort, a handsome elf came into view. She bit her tongue and watched him in silence. He knelt in front of a wooden lattice and lifted a wilting vine in his hand. A moment later, the vine was fully restored. How did he do that? Gwen asked. Her anger washed away under a wave of amazement and curiosity. Ask him, Lyra said. Gwen stepped uncertainly into the garden and approached Virion, stopping a few paces away. She waited for him to acknowledge her, but he quietly continued his healing work with the grapevines. Gwen could hear him humming lowly. At first, she thought it was an insect, but as she walked around to the other side of the lattice, she heard the sound clearly. Gwen watched him work and tried to remain patient, and even glanced questioningly over her shoulder at Lyra. The woman offered nothing in her expression. What is your name? Virion suddenly asked. Gwen snapped her head back around to look at him. His hands were still tending to the vine, but his head was turned in her direction. The first thing she noticed about him was his eyes. They were gray, close in color to his long hair, except his hair shimmered with life. You're blind? Gwen blurted out. She immediately felt stupid for saying it. Virion chuckled, not taking offense. Yes, I am blind. I'm sorry, it surprised me. My name is Gwen. She wished Lyra would have mentioned something before she made a fool of herself. There is nothing to apologize for. Tell me, Gwen, what brings you here? I'm seeking a rune, she replied. Ah, a fellow mage. Welcome to my humble garden. Virion offered a slight bow. What kind of rune are you seeking? Gwen paused. She hadn't given it much thought. She'd gained lightning from Amel, but that wasn't necessarily her choice. She'd merely picked a rune from among hundreds on a whim, not knowing what it did. I'm not sure, she confessed. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Virion replied. Perhaps I can help you decide. Come closer. Gwen did as he asked, and Virion reached out a hand. Let me feel your runes. I only have one, Gwen said as she placed her hand in his. He ran his fingers over the outline of a rune. Gwen could feel power radiating from the elf. He was blind, but Gwen knew he wasn't helpless. Lightning, Virion said. Your single rune is a weapon? Gwen couldn't tell by his tone whether he was impressed or bothered by that. I didn't choose it, she replied. Well, I did choose that rune, but I didn't know beforehand what it was. You chose at random? Not really. I was asked to look over many runes and pick the one that stood out the most. It turned out to be lightning. That's a fascinating way of choosing a rune, Virion said. Are you disappointed with what you received? No, it has helped me. How has a weapon of war helped you? It helped me during a battle, Gwen answered vaguely. The rune fulfilled its purpose, as does all magic. Thank you for entertaining my questions, Gwen. Runes are powerful and should not be entrusted lightly. If you had to choose between a weapon of war and a tool for nature, which would you choose? Gwen considered the question carefully. Given what the future held with the plans of the rebellion, it would make sense that she would choose another rune that could cause destruction. Yet, if this was a test, Virion may refuse to give her a rune at all, depending on her answer. She wanted more runes to aid in the struggle against Torian, but she didn't want to lie to Virion. If he chose not to give her a rune, so be it. I would choose a weapon of war, Gwen said. Virion released her hand. I am not surprised by your answer. I can sense turmoil around you. Is it fear that drives you to the arms of destruction, or something else? I don't think I'm headed into the arms of destruction, Gwen said, but as she spoke the words, she doubted the truth behind them. It was entirely possible that she was on the road to devastation by trying to take down a king. She'd already lost so much, and she felt as though her journey had just begun. Who can know whether that is true or not? I will grant you a rune, Gwen, but it will not be a weapon of war. Thank you, Gwen said. She was a little disappointed, but he had agreed to give her one. The rune I grant you is a tool that will help the world around you. Humans cause chaos wherever they go, but it is my hope that this rune will help balance you. You have seen Olivel. What do you think of it? It's beautiful, Gwen answered. I'm glad you think so. To balance the chaos of lightning, I give you a rune of earth and power. Close your eyes. Gwen did so. She flinched slightly when Virion's fingers touched her temples. A flood of green energy flowed into her mind. It reminded her of the aspect of the elves. You feel the rune, he said. Yes, Gwen replied. It swirled around her, whispering. She couldn't understand the words, but they gave her a feeling of renewal and strength. Speak its name. Seol, Gwen said. There was a slight burning sensation on her right thigh for a brief moment. Then it was gone. Unlike her experience with the lightning, nothing else happened. She'd feared that she would be sucked into the ground or something similar, but there was only peace and tranquility. She opened her eyes and saw Virion staring at her. Although she knew he couldn't see, it made her feel awkward. What does the rune do? Gwen asked. It attuned you to nature. Do you see that vine? Virion pointed at one that was dried out. It is on the verge of death. Help it flourish once more. Gwen wondered how Virion knew the vine was damaged if he couldn't see it. Instead of keeping it to herself, she voiced the question. Simply because I cannot see with these eyes does not mean I am blind to everything, Virion said. I am in tune with the life forces around me and can feel when they are troubled. You must see the world in a very beautiful way, Gwen replied. She knelt and placed her hand gently on the wilted vine. The pulse of magic in her new rune made her fingers twitch, and she tried to hold them still. She licked her lips and spoke the rune. Seol. A surge of green energy flowed from her palm into the vine. Gwen's eyes widened in surprise. The energy tingled as it left her skin. The vine accepted the flow, and its color slowly began to return. After a few more moments, the vine lifted off her hand, and Gwen stopped the magic. She stood and looked at Virion. How does the rune restore life? She asked. It doesn't restore life, Virion corrected. Not in the way you think. Magic is in all things, but not all things can use it. When you channel the magic, it can invigorate things that have been lost. The vine was not yet dead. If it had been, the magic would not have done anything to help it. Magic can restore, and in rare cases create, but it cannot bring life to the dead. You said that you wanted this rune to balance me. Are you expecting me to use this rune to heal every wilting flower and tree I encounter? Of course not, Virion replied. I ask only that you use it for good. Gwen didn't understand how she could use something inherently good for anything other than that, but she kept that to herself. Thank you again, Gwen said. Virion opened his mouth to reply, then paused. A shadowed look appeared on his face, and his eyebrows creased in concentration. He grunted and grabbed at his side, then crumpled to the ground. What is it? Gwen asked, kneeling down and gingerly touching his shoulder. Did I do something wrong? She feared she must have done something incorrectly with the vine. Something dark has tainted Olivel, Virion said between grunts of pain. Gwen looked back at Lyra. She motioned for Gwen to follow her. Do I need to get help? Gwen asked Virion. I feel what Olivel feels, he said. I'll be fine. Go if you must. Gwen left the garden and followed Lyra. The elven woman walked hurriedly and kept glancing around at their surroundings. What is it? Gwen asked. Virion said something tainted Olivel. Can you feel it too? I am not as connected to this place as him, but I can sense something is amiss. They reached the palace tree just as Kirith was coming out. Emil followed behind him. Kirith looked troubled. People are getting ill, he said. It seems to have come out of nowhere. Not everyone is being affected, but we don't know where the source is. Caused by people loyal to your father, Lyra suggested. Maybe, but I don't believe so. My father is a hard man, but I don't think he would cause injury to his own people. Desperation can make people do unthinkable things, Lyra said. Gwen felt something tugging in her mind. Then pain lanced through her skin where her new rune was. She pressed her fingers to the back of her hand, and suddenly she saw a vision of a river flowing underground. The river, Gwen said. The Thaestra? What of it? Kirith asked. I think that's the source. Kirith regarded her suspiciously. What do you mean? Gwen lifted her hand to display the rune. Virion gifted me with this. I think it's trying to tell me where the sickness is coming from. I must go and pray to Solara, Lyra said suddenly. Forgive me, my lord. I will find you when I am done. Lyra rushed off, and Gwen looked from Emil to Kirith. It seemed the worst possible time to pray, but perhaps Lyra had some insight that wasn't evident to her. Let us go and see if the rune speaks truly to you, Kirith said. He led them through the forest city, heading north until they reached a large clearing. 5 trees ringed the area, and between 2 of them was a glowing barrier. The barrier resembled a mirror, reflecting their appearances to them. Gwen tried to peer through it to see what was on the other side, but she only saw herself. This is the only way to the Thaestra, Kirith said. You'll feel disoriented when you go through it, but it's only momentary. He wasted no time and stepped through, disappearing completely from view. Your turn, Emil said. Gwen stepped through, and a powerful wave of nausea struck her. She staggered and almost fell, but Kirith grabbed her arm and steadied her. Emil came through and stopped, suddenly, looking past Kirith and Gwen, her mouth open in shock. Kirith appeared confused and followed her gaze. He gasped. Gwen's queasiness subsided, and she saw the startled look on Emil's face. What is it? She asked, then turned to look. Standing beside the Thaestra River was a dragon.
Chapter 10. Connell. They were looking for me? Briok frowned, avoiding Connell's questioning glance. Yeah, Saren answered. Said you'd know where to find the dragon. Me? Briok exclaimed. A dragon? What makes them think that? I know, right? She smirked. Like I said, they were all a bit on the loony side. How about we worry about that in the morning? Connell suggested, yawning. I'm tired. Good night, boss. Saren grinned. Tethering his horse next to Briok's, Connell leaned in and in a tone only Briok could hear, said, they were looking for you. How would they know about you? I don't know, Briok grimly replied. How would they know you were even here? I said I don't know. Well, you better figure something out first, and fast, because they knew exactly where you were, where we were. Briok's lips pursed, and he twisted a right forearm to reveal a small set of runes near his elbow. Instead of the imprinted black ink, the runes gave off a very faint shimmer of crimson. Connell saw it. Why does that rune look weird? Never noticed it before. Briok slowly shook his head, his face grim. This has never happened before. What's the rune for? It's a special rune, one that I will not divulge at this time, he brusquely answered. You'll find out soon enough. Get some sleep. We need to get to Farrell by tomorrow. Though dissatisfied with the reply, Connell knew enough not to argue. He was pleased to see that Maldwick had set a spot up for him to stretch out next to his bedroll. Everything okay, boss? You still awake? Wanted to make sure you were okay before I settle down. Everything's fine. Thanks for setting up a spot for me. Anytime. You run into those crazy fellas? The ones about the dragon? No, Connell lied. Why'd they think we knew anything about a dragon? They're looking for that half-druid. So I understand, he yawned. Talk about crazy. Maldwick uttered a soft chuckle. Know what I think, boss? What? Maldwick lowered his voice. I think they might not have been as crazy as we think. Connell twisted his head to stare at him. Dragons. Do you believe in dragons? I've never seen one or heard of anyone who's ever seen one, but that doesn't mean they still might exist. So, they've been hiding all this time. Think about it. A dragon has to eat and drink. In all this time, no one has ever accidentally bumped into one? I know, Maldwick said, agreed. Still, that half-druid knows something. What makes you say that? He's a druid. Connell turned his head to see Briok, flipping a blanket off his shoulders. Maybe you're right. Be nice to have dragons on our side. Have to find them first, Maldwick said. True, Connell drowsily answered. In the meantime, we have enough things to worry about. There was a heavy pause before Maldwick asked, Are we still highwaymen, boss? Not anymore, Maldwick. We're mercenaries now. Maldwick pondered the change. Seems dangerous. Not everyone is a fighter. Doesn't have to be. Some are planners, some are better at logistics, some might be spies and those kind of things. However, as we add more people to our company, we might want to emphasize the fighter part. Maldwick nodded. And I'm still going to be the boss. Yes, I have other things I need to accomplish. Like what? You'll find out soon enough. Now I sound like Briok. Let's get some sleep. I want to be at Denhelm by tomorrow. Good night, boss. Folding his hands across his chest, he was soon comfortably asleep. Connell's thoughts wouldn't let him rest, and by the time he drifted off to sleep, he felt his shoulders shaken and Maldwick grinning at him. Time to get up, boss. Rubbing his bleary eyes, Connell glanced around to see everyone else was awake, rolling up bedrolls while munching on jerky, day-old bread, apples, or anything else from his saddlebags. His stomach growled, and he stood and stretched. Boss, Connell turned and Maldwick tossed him an apple. Hey, thanks. In short order, the company headed out the Barbican, Connell in front, Briok beside him. Galladay and Torgreth had yet to settle their debate, but the topic had drifted from carvers to fighters and now to cooking. Connell wondered how soon it would touch on who were the better lovers. The ride to Denhelm was uneventful. Connell figured the size of the company, all carrying weapons, was enough of a deterrent. It was early evening by the time they arrived at the gates. The guards shooed people in and out in order to close the gates for the night. Seeing the size of the troop approaching the gates, one guard alerted the other guards, who spread themselves across the opening. What do you want? The guard sergeant demanded, inserting himself through two guards to stand defiantly before them. He was a middle-aged, seasoned soldier with the air of one used to being obeyed. A place to spend the night, Connell replied with a smile. This town does have inns, does it not? Of course it does. What is your business here? Not that it's any of your business, Connell coolly said, but we are here to see Lord Farrell. What do you want with him? The sergeant folded his arms across his chest and stared at Connell. Like I said, it's none of your business. Connell leaned forward in the saddle. But to assuage your inquisitiveness, send a runner to notify Lord Farrell that Connell from Henlon is here to see him. I'll wait. Connell watched the man frown, deliberating on how much trouble he'd get into if he bothered the Lord versus how much trouble he'd be in if he didn't report what was going on. Deciding instead to dodge responsibility, he turned to one of the guards. Get the captain. Ah, Connell chuckled. Let someone else take the blame. A wise decision, especially if one wants to safely move up the ranks. The sergeant shot him a guilty as charged, sour look. Several minutes later, the captain arrived in ill humor at being disturbed. He was a short man working his way towards Plum, with an unruly shock of red hair that gave him the appearance of having just woken up. What goes on here? He demanded. Like I told your sergeant, I've come to see Lord Farrell. Connell waved to the company behind him. I promise my friends will be good. I recognize him, Captain, one of the guards spoke up. The sergeant snapped his head around to glare at the man. Why didn't you say something? You already said Fergus to go fetch the captain. Well, out with it, man. How do you recognize him? I was with Lord Farrell. We went to Henlon that last time to collect slaves. I saw him then. He's Farrell's man. The guard replied with a hard swallow. He's a cobra. The effect was instantaneous. All those within hearing distance stiffened. I'm sorry, the captain said, his voice almost a grovel. Please, come in, please. Swept his hand and bowed in a grand gesture. Thank you, Connell affably replied, though irritated at the revelation. The way things were going, everyone would know he was a cobra. Urging his mount forward, he led the way through the gate. Maldwick threaded his way between the others and came up alongside Connell. Is it true, boss? Which part? Both. Connell frowned and thought, I was Farrell's man for about half a day. My guess is that he still thinks I am. That's all about to change, and yes, I am a cobra. No wonder I couldn't defeat you, Maldek marveled. You're a good man, Maldek, and a far better leader than Oskan ever was. I have great plans for you. Yes, boss, thank you. Not wanting Connell to see him grin with pleasure, he turned to nonchalantly gaze around the parting crowds. Most people seemed unaffected by the visitors, and simply stepped aside and went about their business. It was as he started to turn his head around to make another comment that he noticed something odd. Acting as though he hadn't noticed, he turned back to Connell and smiled. There's at least half a dozen working their way through the crowd, following alongside us, more interested than normal. Connell smiled back. I know. I saw them when we came into the city. Passed the word to the others. As Maldek drifted back, Connell leaned towards Briok and raised a hand, pointing down the street. Pretending to comment on something ahead, he said, we're being followed, and I have a feeling they're more interested in you than the rest of us. I noticed, Briok grimly answered, slipping a glance down at his arm at the shimmering rune. Abruptly halting, he slid down from his saddle. What are you doing? Connell demanded. Harder to ambush me with an arrow, he answered. Immediately understanding, Connell ordered everyone to remain mounted and surround the druid. Galadir and Torgreth flanked Briok, and while Maldek and the others added to the protection, causing some consternation as they took up most of the street. Yet their quick thinking thwarted the danger, though Connell knew it was temporary. Still, despite the complaints and snide comments by the citizens scrambling out of the way, they managed to safely arrive at the Barbican, leading into Farrell's castle. Once they were past the portcullis, Connell breathed a sigh of relief. Entering the courtyard, he scanned the grounds. To his surprise, Lord Farrell, flanked by half a dozen retainers, was waiting for him at the top of the stairs leading to his apartments. Connell, Farrell called out with a guarded smile, watching as the courtyard filled up. I was wondering if I was ever going to see you again. My Lord Farrell, Connell grinned. Twisting ahead to catch Maldek's eye, he said, find a place close by to stay. Let me know where. Also, see what we can dig up on those who are following us. Got it, boss. Maldek circled his fingers in the air and pointed out back through the Barbican. Once Maldek and company headed out, Connell slid down from his saddle, handing the reins to a stable boy. Let me introduce my friends, Connell grandiloquently said, as three more stable boys appeared for the two other horses and Torgreth's pony. This is Torgreth, as fine a dwarf as there ever was one. Ah, you're much too kind, my lord. Torgreth flipped a hand at him, though pleased with the compliment. The tall, handsome elf is Galadir, and the other handsome, brooding man is Briok, a half-druid. They both tipped their heads in acknowledgement. Farrell recognized a not-so-subtle change in his former slave. The man appeared far too sure of himself, bordering on arrogant. He would need to be brought back down a notch, taught his place. The dwarf calling him my lord was a bit too much. Assuming his most regal demeanor, he said, what brings you here? Urgent matters that we need to discuss in private. He started up the steps, the others in tow. A retainer, sword drawn at his side, stepped forward to interpose himself between the ascending Connell and Laurel Farrell. Without breaking a stride, Connell's fist shot out, catching the man squarely in the chest and propelling him into the air over the two stolen guards behind him, who simultaneously turned their heads to follow their compatriots' rapid rise and crash onto the smooth granite stones in the portico floor. Hold, Briok commanded. His hands raised, the other guards scrambled to protect their lord. We're not here to harm his lordship. In fact, we come here to seek his aid. Farrell's jaw had dropped when he saw his guard sailing overhead. He had not even seen Connell's hand move when the guard had lifted off his feet. Who are you? I'm not one to be trifled with, calmly said. Like Briok said, we didn't come here to cause you harm. Matters are occurring that require your involvement. May we come in? Connell stood 2 steps below Farrell. Farrell frowned as he appraised the man who had so recently been a mere slave. What had happened that he now traveled with an elf, a dwarf, and a druid, not to mention his own company? That alone warranted his interest. But it was Connell's overt lack of knowing his place that irritated Farrell. He had half a mind to tell him to go bother someone else. For a moment, he regretted giving him his freedom. Still, he did exchange his life for mine. I do owe him that. Yes, Farrell finally nodded. Come inside. Farrell led the way through the doors, the one retainer limping as he collected himself off the floor. Farrell's steward joined them as they entered. The steward was an austere man with a fawning smile, reserved for his lord. The hall is ready for you, my lord. Our discussion needs to be private, Connell reminded him. Ignoring him, the steward addressed Farrell. With my lord's approval, I've taken the liberty of providing some ale. That's fine, Arnold, Farrell replied, wanting to remind Connell who was boss of royalty. He tersely added, the hall will be fine. Connell jerked to a halt, causing the retainers to awkwardly stumble to avoid bumping into him. Lord Farrell, what we have to say is for your ears only. I chose you because I believe that you can be trusted. If after what you've heard, you decide to share it, that is your choice. However, if this is more than you can accommodate, then we will leave and see if Lord Brody is more receptible. Farrell bristled at the man's insolence. Whirling around, he glanced at his former slave, but Connell had anticipated the man's anger. I'm not who you think I am. Really? Farrell snidely replied. You're not the same vagabond I found in the goal in Hemlin? No, Connell replied confidently. I'm not the same vagabond you had branded. Because you did not know, I will not hold it against you. Hold it against me? Farrell exclaimed. Now you've gone too far. Before you do something stupid, Connell shot back, you may want to hear what we have to say. I traded my life for yours once before. Will you trust me enough to listen? Well, Farrell scowled at him. Out of the corners of his eyes, he caught the surprised looks of his steward and retainers. Not wanting any further revelations, he twisted his head to look at the steward. Leave us. The steward turned an imperious gaze at the retainers. You'll wait outside. You too, Connell said. Me? The steward cocked an eyebrow in umbrage. But I'm his lord's steward. I know, Connell dryly answered. I don't trust you like he does. Go, Arnell, Farrell said. As you wish, my lord. Arnell respectfully bowed, then shot Connell an evil look. Once the room was clear of Farrell's men, he folded his arms and cast an imperial gaze at Connell. Well? Connell smiled, then turned to Briac. You tell him. As you wish, my lord. What's with this my lord crap? Farrell snapped. Briac stood to full height. The vagabond you had branded just happens to be the son of King Cameron of Easton Toll.
Dun, dun, dun. All righty. That'll wrap it up for this week. So be sure to hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed and follow along as we continue reading through Rune Marked, and we'll pick it up next week. See you guys then.